Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Forbes staff writer Zach Everson. Zach, thanks for popping on.
Hey, Brittany, good to see you.
Former President Donald Trump and his former personal attorney and ex-fixer Michael Cohen have been at each other's throats now publicly for a while. But behind the scenes paints a very different picture according to your reporting. Before we get into that, first set the scene for us. How are they openly feuding?
Sure. Well, this has been going on for quite some time, basically since Cohen flipped on him during the Mueller investigation. Cohen had notably testified and on behalf of Trump and basically lied to Congress on Trump's behalf and ended up going to jail for that. And it was shortly around that time, shortly after Cohen's office got raided, he had voiced thoughts about possibly flipping. And it was at that point that Trump stopped paying his legal fees. So that's kind of what this case is about.
Michael Cohen was known as Trump's fixer for over a decade, and he reportedly said this in 2018, obviously before he flipped. He would, quote, rather jump out of a building than turn on Donald Trump. Can you remind us why this relationship did in fact sour?
Sure, maybe he'd rather jump out of a building than offend Trump, but he certainly wouldn't rather pay his own $1.9 million in legal fees or go to jail. Apparently that's where we draw the line. So, yeah, Cohen had been with Trump for probably about 10 years. He'd been his fixer. People were known that there's no journalist, if they wrote negative articles, would sometimes reportedly get calls from Cohen. He was the one Trump went to take care of. Trump had to take care of all of his problems. And, this was a problem that seemed a little bit too big for what Michael Cohen to do when you're talking about congressional investigations and some pretty high profile lawsuits.
So now bring us to current day here. What is happening behind closed doors?
Sure. So right now there are actually four instances of Trump and Cohen battling each other in the legal system. Obviously, best known is the Manhattan DA's criminal case against Trump, where Cohen is one of the key witnesses there. And you've also got the $500 million lawsuit that Trump filed against Cohen earlier this week. There are two other cases that are ongoing that Cohen filed a while ago. One of them is against Trump, as well as Attorney General William Barr and officials with the Bureau of Prisons, that says his return to prison after he'd been furloughed was in retaliation for publishing a tell-all memoir. Now, the last case is where Cohen sued Trump for unspecified, was going to let the judge decide on how much, but said it was $1.9 million of legal fees and another $1.9 million in money that he lost by Trump reneging on his promise to pay his legal fees. So that's what they're currently going back and forth over. And what's interesting here is that the case was originally dismissed by a lower court, and this is in New York State court. The appellate court voted 5-0 to bring it back. And then Trump and Cohen's parties had to get into a mandatory settlement talks. And it seems like those are going okay. They're down a path. They just informed the judge that they wanted to have more time to continue mediation and didn't need to go back in court. So kind of interesting.
I read your headline today and I really had a double take here, because when is there an instance of when you're publicly sparring with someone and then behind the scenes having what you're describing as somewhat amicable settlement talks?
It's really strange. And especially, there was a lot of speculation that Trump sued Cohen earlier this week for intimidation. And obviously that was all focused on the Manhattan DA case against Trump. But, it's also, okay, we're settling this lawsuit here. You wanted 3.8 million. Okay, great. Well, we'll have our settlement talks. Oh, yeah, by the way, now I'm going to sue you for 500 million as well. So it's hard to not see those two possibly being connected in that regard. I mean, they did inform the judge they were going to mediation just, in late March. So it's not all that long ago. It's just fascinating that the lawsuit Trump brought this week came about 2 years after most of the offenses that he listed in there.
What would motivate Trump then to settle with Cohen, especially in light of this new lawsuit where that's $500 million? That's just an astronomical number compared to what the potential settlement could be.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I reached out to the Trump org. I did not hear back from them. I reached out to Michael Cohen, who directed me to his attorney, who also did not respond to an inquiry about why the Trumps may have wanted to settle this case. It's fascinating. He's got 45 recent cases, investigations, lawsuits. Why decide to settle this one? Especially since it is against a guy who's basically your main adversary right now in the press.
Exactly. And I do want to discuss how Michael Cohen fits all into all of these investigations and lawsuits that Trump's tracking. You noted in your tracker itself, there's dozens of them. You highlighted four that Michael Cohen's involved in. I want to specifically talk about the Manhattan DA case where Michael Cohen is a witness. Is he a credible witness? He's lied in front of Congress before.
Right. I mean, that's not good. I'm not an attorney, but if I were, I probably wouldn't want to put somebody on the stand who lied in front of Congress. That said, I was reading Mark Pomerantz's books, who's one of the attorneys who was working on that case and left when he thought the DA wasn't taking it far enough and fast enough. And, he pointed out that corroborating witnesses are seldom ideal witnesses. If they're involved in the alleged crime in the first place, they're typically not someone who's kept their heads out of it. So that's typically what you're going to deal with. And you're going to see the attorneys on both sides. If this were to go to court, the Manhattan DA will say, yes, Cohen did all this, but, he's not lying here. He knows all these things. He's not doing that anymore. And even though he did lie to Congress, what he's saying can just be supported by other facts. And the Trump attorneys are just going to have a field day, on the other hand, going right after everything Cohen's done wrong in his life.
And how has Michael Cohen responded to all of this?
With a lot of TV appearances. It seems like it is very difficult to change the channel. I see him on NBC. I saw him on CNN. In fact, he was on NBC Nightly News talking about the Manhattan DA's case and said, Trump never settles. Trump will never settle this. And I was visiting my parents at the time, watching the news with them. And I was just like, you are literally in settlement talks with him right now. Like, this guy who you just said doesn't settle. Not only is that not true, he settles all the time, but he is settling with you right now. So who knows when this thing will get resolved. Why
would he say that? Because it makes him sound like a liar, obviously.
It does. We're also talking about a case that no one's really paying attention to. This is so far down the list of investigations that people are paying attention to with Trump. You've obviously got Manhattan DA, you've got the special counsel with DOJ, you've got the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Those are the ones that people are typically focused on right now. And most of the other ones are flying below the radar. The E. Jean Carroll one is certainly getting some attention, given the seriousness of the allegations there. But a lot of these other lawsuits are just, they make a big splash when they get filed, and then they kind of just disappear from the public consciousness.
Speaking of ones that made a big splash that we already mentioned, is that $500 million lawsuit. Does that one have legs?
It depends on who you talk to. Certainly, I would imagine the Trumps think it does, or at least think it's going to last long enough to keep Cohen tied up for a little bit. Although Trump did just get admonished recently for filing a frivolous lawsuit against Hillary Clinton, where the judge then fined his attorney for wasting the court's time. So, Trump's certainly capable of bringing a case that has no merits. And speaking to an attorney for Cohen yesterday, who's not representing him in this case, but who represents him in some other matters, and he just didn't think anything. He really just thought it was kind of a nuisance suit against Cohen.
That's interesting. You used the phrase "tie him up," nuisance. Is that the point? Is that Trump's strategy? Just kind of drag him through the legal system?
That is Trump's strategy all the time with any of these legal cases. We saw it with emoluments, which. We still never got a definitive ruling if a foreign government booking rooms at Trump's hotel violated the Constitution. It just never even got to the point where we got a decision on that. And that was, over 4 years before he was no longer president and the issue became moot. He is phenomenal and assisted by Democrats throughout this case, though, where he will ask for extensions and they will give it to him. And that might be something that, nicety that they would normally do in those circumstances. But Trump just takes advantage of this all the time. You've also got Alan Weisselberg is set to be released from jail in 5 days. And there's been reports that the Manhattan DA has reached out to him. And if he doesn't cooperate with them, they may look at new charges on him, regarding insurance fraud. Well, this also sends a message to Weisselberg, whether that was the intent or not. It's certainly possible that, hey, they're working you over. By the way, if you do go to the Manhattan DA's side, this is what awaits you. A $500 million lawsuit.
Does it look like Alan Weisselberg will flip?
I don't know. I had a really good talk about that the other day, and it was like, what would you do? And if it was his age, if I were his age, I would have flipped ages ago. Of course, I wouldn't have got myself in that situation to begin with, I hope. But he could be looking at a lot of time in jail. We don't know what these insurance fraud charges might be. He's held out so far. The thought was he would have flipped earlier if he was going to do it. He's been pretty steadfast to Trump his entire life. That said, he's up there in age, and is certainly looking at the possibility that even just a sentence in jail for a few years could end up being the rest of his life.
Before he went to jail, didn't Donald Trump or the Trump family throw him a party? Is there a sense?
Oh, yeah.
Is there a sense from them that they might be a little anxious he could flip? I mean, he was the CFO, so if there's secrets, I'm sure he does know them.
Right. No, they threw him a party. It reminded me of something like of Goodfellas, where the party was actually even thrown, like, I think it was after he agreed to testify against the Trump org, but not Trump. They threw him a party, in which case it's like, all right, he doesn't have any incriminating evidence that he's going to be sharing in this case. So he's also still getting paid. I believe he's on a severance for that runs through 2024, which obviously if he's going to testify, if he were to testify against Trump, as we can see from the Cohen case, it seems pretty certain that the Trump org is not going to continue paying that severance, just like they didn't pay for Cohen's attorneys once he flipped.
Well, Zach, as updates come in per usual, you are always welcome back, and please do come back. Zach Everson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brittany.